Hello and welcome to Upside Down. I'm George Hooper, pastor at Community United Methodist Church in Huntington Beach, working also with Brian Tipton, who is our connectional teaching pastor and continues to do so in this coming year. And we have a guest with us, Kane Durham, who is with us. Uh, and and we've talked with Kane before, but it's a new year, and there have been some significant changes recently in governmental leadership, both in the country and in our city. And we feel that it's going to have an effect on how folks are treated who are in the LGBTQIA community, along with laws that are changing, but moreover attitudes as well. We're looking broadly at there being a pushback against movements towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, and in terms of being aware of our own privilege and a rejection of that openness. And so it's legal, it is governmental, it is societal, and so we thought we'd have a conversation about what it means to be an ally and where the movement goes forward in this setting. So I'm going to hand over to Brian to kind of lead this discussion.
So Kane, I would like you, if you could, just to briefly discuss the work that you do and kind of where it's leading you in this moment right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said earlier, let me know if the wind gets too heavy, and I'll just pop my hood up. So, yes, as George mentioned earlier, my name is Kane Durham. I am the executive director of an organization called Pride at the Pier. We've been around for about 2 years, and there goes that wind. We've been around for about 2 years, and we've been a nonprofit for a little under 1 year. Um, we started in Huntington Beach in response to the what was in effect a pride flag ban from the local government there, and we've evolved to what we are today, which is an organization that is working to fight for the dignity, equity, and safety of our local queer community, and help encourage and educate folks to get into local politics and civics in this area because we do believe that we can make a difference if we have more of us involved. Um, for myself, I've been living in Orange County for close to a decade now, but I'm California born and raised, and I'm a transgender man. So I do have I'm able to sit in both worlds where I know that in public I pass as a cisgender white man, and I can use that privilege, but I also have the lived experience of being, a member of a marginalized community in that way.
Thank you for introducing yourself, for opening up. Uh, you can see a distinct shift as we begin 2025. Clearly, the election kind of told us where the country is going in 2025 and some of the shifts that are happening. Could you speak to some of your work and kind of where you're feeling pulled in this moment to do work and what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to people's hearts and how we engage people and organize communities, there's often a dangerous pendulum between being complacent and comfortable with where the world's at because it doesn't personally affect you, and being apathetic because it's overwhelmingly dark and it affects you too much. And that is, unfortunately, I think where a lot of folks are swinging back and forth in the last several years. And, as we enter 2025, and there is a lot of daily news that we're being hit with about, various marginalized communities, not just the LGBTQ community, that are currently being impacted, by both local and national politics and the culture that we live in. We can see that there are a lot of people who want to engage. They want to find ways to help. They do care enough to be involved. And so, our main overarching action that we're trying to move forward with is to give people ways to get involved at this point. That's, I think, when it comes to national politics, a lot of folks feel, you know, completely overwhelmed by the scale of some of the things that we're hearing about. And then in local politics, you get folks who aren't necessarily educated on how to get involved. And so moving into 2025, we of course focus more on local politics than we do on national politics. But the reality is that national politics has an impact on our local politics. And so trying to weave the balance between the two of those is important for us.
You talk a bit about how national politics has shaped local politics, particularly in Huntington Beach, and the surrounding area, but really in Huntington. And if people are wondering, like, what can I do? What would you tell them in this moment?
Oof. What I would tell them is, don't step away, first of all. I think that, one of the things that we within the Pride of the Peer, volunteer team, one of the things that we heard a lot after the election in November was folks saying, "Well, I'm going to go underground," or, this, clearly, because the election results didn't go the way that the person speaking, wanted them to go. I don't know, like, I put all this effort in and it didn't make a difference, so I'm just not going to try anymore, or I'm not going to bother engaging because clearly nobody's listening. Those are all absolutely understandable emotional responses in the direct aftermath of results that could be harmful to the LGBTQ community here. And I think, first of all, the first things first, beyond what can you do, I would say what not to do is to disengage. Do not disengage. But obviously, not disengaging isn't really an action. So I would say one of the things that we're trying to do, and I know other groups in this area are trying to do, is to build an offline community. Because I think we know that the algorithms on social media are not necessarily introducing us to new people or to new ideas. And I think, as we are hearing things about, TikTok being taken away, or there's folks that are boycotting Meta because of the, concern over they aren't going to be doing fact checking anymore. People are leaving Twitter, X. It's if we are continuing to try to push through our actions primarily online, we're not going to go anywhere. And so I would say, yes, do not disengage, but start to engage on an in-person level. I think we need to find ways to build those communities. And in a church context, you guys have a wonderful ability to do that. That the church is a third space in a way that a lot of people do not have. And so I think, the CUMC has an opportunity to build that with the foundation that you already have.
Can you talk a little bit about what you mean when you say third space?
Yeah, absolutely. So a third space is a term that refers to a place that is not your work, it's not your home. It's a third place that you can go and be without necessarily spending any money to be in community. And there's been a lot of conversation in recent years about how we are losing these third spaces. We used to have, as a society, we used to have places that people would go and just hang out. Whether it be, the bowling alley or a coffee shop or, the barber shop, there was places that people go and had community. And we've begun to lose those. And we've got more and more reliance on building third space online, which of course has its value, but I think we're seeing the detractions from that as time goes by.
I notice that in organizations like the Elks and Kiwanis, th those are all organizations that are meant to be places like that, and uh, they're all struggling in terms of people just not being a part of that anymore and pulling
Yeah.
away. So there are fewer and fewer third spaces. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you were talking about social media and like pulling away, but one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about is self-care. And in particular for queer folks, what does self-care look like right now? Um,
Mhm.
you talked about the kind of self-policing that is going to be happening online. Can you speak a little bit about some of the kind of policies that are changing around use of language, and the removal of particular language on meta platforms,
Mhm.
and how that can make it so that queer folk do not feel safe online in those spaces anymore, and then
Mhm.
what might allyship look like in response to that?
Right. No, that's a really great question. I think well, in Meta in particular, uh, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Meta, recently announced that they would be ending their fact checking program, and replacing it with a alternative that looks closer to what is currently on Twitter or X, where it's a community notes, right? So if you're a user on that platform, you can add a community note saying, actually, this is not accurate. Here's the information. It's crowdsourcing fact checking, which, as I'm sure you can understand, has some drawbacks. But which, the concern on that level is there's going to be an even wider proliferation of the kinds of fear mongering articles from inaccurate sources that continue to push, some of the inaccurate information that we've seen regarding the LGBTQ community. In addition to that, Meta has said that they are loosening their guidelines on what is considered, language that violates their community guidelines. So, if you're to use a slur on Facebook, or if you're sitting there and saying, I don't know, like, oh, all immigrants are criminals, right? Like something of that effect on Instagram. Previously, that theoretically would have been something that you could have reported, and it would get removed. And if a person using that kind of language, has repeated strikes against them, they could even have their platform taken down entirely. And it was a way to kind of limit the amount of really harmful language that we see on that platform. Now, I think any minority on the platform would tell you that it's not exactly like it's been working great as is.
Thank you for recognizing
Um,
that. Yes.
yeah, it certainly has not been a great platform. There's been plenty of things that I've reported, and I get a report back like, 3 weeks later, no violation found, and I'm like, but they
Yeah.
called me a child predator. Like, are you sure?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That
yeah,
is exactly what I saw happen over and over
yep,
again.
over and over and over again. So, but they're now removing the specifically the LGBTQ community from a lot of those protections. So now, not only are we looking at a regulation system that is imperfect and lets a lot of things go. Now there's just nothing to report, period. You're going to pull up that report and it's not even going to have that community listed, for you to submit the report for. And I think for folks that are not super engaged on the functionality of social media, that can seem kind of small. But an example of how this has gone wrong is, and Brian, maybe you could remember the exact nation. There's a country in the area of the Indian subcontinent where because the Meta does not have content moderators that speak the language that is in that area, all the kinds of guidelines and content regulation that they're supposed to have hadn't been happening in that area. And the amount of paranoia and discriminatory language that was being spread about a specific religious minority in that area has led to ethnic cleansing. And you're having an issue where you've got millions of people who are fleeing that country uh, because of the misinformation that has been shared. And so I think that we do need to consider the reality of how dangerous social media can be when used for ill against a marginalized community. That was a lot.
It was a lot, but I think where you ended is incredibly important because a lot of folks that I've been seeing have said, okay, I'm going to just opt out and go over to Blue Sky. Um, and I worry, I mean, I think for some folks, the question of self-care comes in a place where I can't be in that space because it's not healthy for me. But I think for other folks, it's important to say, okay, if I'm comfortable being there, I need to be able to speak back against some of this misinformation and straight up lies that are being told. Um, and otherwise you get what you're talking about, where it just kind of snowballs and then it gets really dangerous.
Mm-hmm. It does, yeah, and I would agree. I think that I know that there are a lot of people who are choosing to leave those platforms. I can tell you that Pride of the Peer will not be leaving those platforms. We do have a presence. In fact, our Instagram page is where most of our communication goes out. We're close to 2,000 followers on Instagram at this point, and we're on Facebook as well. Um, and we never had a Twitter profile, and we never will. I was just asking for trouble. But we are on Meta, and like as we had a team leader meeting where we discussed this, and we won't be leaving those platforms because that's where we need to meet people where they're at to be able to get this communication out. And so, yes, I think there are. If you are a user of those platforms, sorry, I got the Santa Ana's blowing through. If you're a user of those platforms and you do choose to stay on those platforms, I think it would be beneficial to push back on that kind of language when you hear it. I think, it's there are a lot of people, both online and offline, who have chosen to just shut down conversation with people that they know who hold these views. I know I've done it myself. There's people in my life that I just, unfriended. Um, but the unfortunate side effect of that is that we are creating um, more and more dangerous echo chambers. If the people in your life, whether it be on your Facebook friends list or the Huntington Beach community page, or if it be your neighbors online, if you're not talking to those people, they are never hearing anything but the views that are being fed to them by people who are in the same wavelength, or even more aggressive in the other direction.
One of the first things that the current city council majority did when they came into office was to prevent anonymous complaints about businesses, so that it would make it a dangerous thing to raise a complaint. Um,
Yes.
and that there could be retribution there. Um, And I see that's part of what's going on here. But would you suggest for those who choose to stay on the various meta platforms, if they're going to use community notes, to engage in that process and to raise community notes? One of the most satisfying things before I left X Twitter was to see when Elon himself would get community noted, and that would get voted up. And I think seriously that could be, if you're choosing to remain on a meta platform, as the church is doing to do, because this is one of the ways that we're able to connect with people and stream our services. One would be, do not financially support uh, than at platforms by clicking on advertiser links. Don't engage with that. Don't purchase through that. Don't reward this behavior. And the second is if they're going to institute community notes, take it seriously. I think one of the issues, as I read the comments that Zuckerberg made about the changes, is that he said something that he meant differently, but it came out with an awful lot of truth in it. As we work to promote free expression, I think it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there's less concern about the bias of our teams. He meant that the teams in California were biased, but what he's saying is we're going to go and put our teams into Texas, where there are now laws against gender affirming care, and so it's not only for the people who use the platforms, it's for the employees of the platforms as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and I can tell you for myself, if I was working for Meta, and I got informed that I needed to move to Texas, aside from, you know, preferring the weather in California, I would not be able to do that. It would be legitimately hazardous for me to make that move. Considering the laws that have been passed in Texas, and the laws that are, we are continuing to see. I think as more and more states like Texas, like Florida, like Idaho, Tennessee, etc., are passing laws that, make it a crime. It would be a crime for me to use the men's bathroom. And obviously I spent many years using the women's room. It's not like I don't know where things are, but I don't think the women in those spaces would feel comfortable with this face walking in. And so, but those kinds of laws are being passed in that space. And so I agree. I think it is hazardous to the LGBTQ employees of Meta, of which there are plenty, for that move. And I think also it is an interesting point, where I think this is a problem that we hear a lot, in the way business leaders or certain politicians, or even in many cases, legacy media platforms like the LA Times or CNN or what have you, when they talk about, oh, well, we're going to look at both sides of this issue, or we want to make sure that we're removing bias. Both sides of an issue is something like, housing, right? Whether or not we should put, housing in, or things like, how we should use our city's budget, right? These are issues where there's multiple sides, and it would be reasonably fair to consider, your bias. When it comes to the dignity and safety and equity of human beings, and you have one side saying, hey, we just want to make sure that we feel safe, and another side who's saying, hey, these people are coming after your children, that is not a both sides issue. And for Zuckerberg to suggest that moving to a state where you have Attorney General Ken Paxton, demanding all of the records of every single trans patient in Texas so that they can have that information for their legal purposes, that is not an unbiased space. That is moving into a space that is in line with the bias of the shareholders that Zuckerberg wants to make happy. And I think that is something that we need to be calling out.
It reminds me of the James Baldwin quote, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. I mean, that's the core of what you're saying.